Hi guys, it is Dom here from Soundsphere and Wobbling About and Rocking Out. Just had a wonderful chat with Jess from Mallavora, talking about living as a disabled musician, about being disabled and touring, about new music and material, and sort of being a motivational force in the music industry for people with differences and disabilities. So I want to thank Jess for their time. Please do check out Mallavora in the links that I'm going to put in this video. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you soon. Cheers.
Okay, so it's awesome to have you here with me, Jess. Became a fan of your band and what you're trying to do. I discovered you on TikTok, and it's been a bit of a whirlwind time. You've got a new single out. There's a lot to talk about here. But before we delve into that, just so I'm not kind of making any assumptions and not kind of saying this and that and whatever, obviously it's about this is about you. Obviously, I know you have a chronic pain condition and some differences to talk about, but rather than me kind of say, this and that, can you tell me a bit about your difference, your disability, and how it affects you on a day-to-day basis?
Hey Dom, yeah, it's really good to be chatting with you. Thank you so much for having me on. I was really pleased when you reached out to me. I had no idea you had cerebral palsy, but I'd heard of Soundsphere, so I was really excited to chat to you. So my name's Jess. I am the lead vocalist of the rock band Mallavora. We're based in Bristol. I have also started to do some solo work under the name Yiska, which is the Hebrew word for Jessica. I am working with Bristol Beacon as an artist on their Future Proof programme. And that sort of came about through me kind of being open about my disability sort of for the first time within the context of music. And the fact that you sort of found me on TikTok and heard about me through TikTok is interesting because I honestly started the TikTok page just as a way to play around with talking about disability, to hopefully promote the band, but I really didn't know what I was doing. And then, suddenly I had a little bit of a viral video, and it was a bit overwhelming. But I'm sure we'll get into that a bit more. But yeah, that's just a little short intro about me.
That was tight. It was good. It's concise. Yeah, thank you so much, Jess. Again, a fascinating journey for you in Mallavora and obviously beyond that as well. I mean, you touched on there. You've only recently started talking about your disability online. In terms of doing those viral TikToks, and a lot of people are getting behind them. In terms of how has it been for you? Not, I don't want to say you've become a spokesperson or anything like that, but certainly putting yourself out there in the public eye, going viral. Obviously, promoting your music is one thing, but you are effectively putting yourself out there. How has that been for you?
Yeah, it's been a challenge, to be honest. I'm glad it happened when it did, and the fact that just a random video happened to get that wider viewing and attention at the time that it did, because really not very long ago I wouldn't have been ready for that kind of attention and sort of spotlight on me regarding disability at all. I've only really started to identify as disabled in the last year or two. I've only started using mobility aids in the last couple of years. And due to me having a sort of chronic illness, chronic pain condition, whatever you want to call it, I think I was in denial for a very long time. And through therapy, I was sort of able to kind of accept and go through that process of grieving and acceptance of understanding that I do have a disability. And I've gone through a huge sort of personal journey in terms of like accepting the fact that I've got a disability, understanding what that means, and adjusting my life to make sure that I can, still have some quality of life with my condition. So when it came to talking about it publicly, like I said, on TikTok, I really just started out trying to play with TikTok, trying to figure out how it worked. And it sort of provided me with a nice little safe space, if you like, to just make funny videos to trending audios and sounds and things like that, and talking about disability for the first time in that respect. I think I was feeling very conscious that if I started talking about my disability or using my mobility aids, when I was with my band, I was conscious that I would be making a statement without necessarily really wanting to be making a statement. Because, you know, you're there with your walking stick, and whether you want to or not, people are going to notice that and sort of be like, you know, what's that about? And when I first started using my stick on stage was really, really recently, literally within the last few months. I was having questions like, oh, you know, is that just a cool prop, or have you like hurt your foot? And then I was sort of having to like explain, no, I'm disabled, that's why I use it. And that's sort of, I realized then that I couldn't really just use the stick, and I didn't feel like I could just use the stick and not say anything. It felt like it was coming hand in hand. So then I sort of, you know, thought, okay, maybe I should start talking about it. But honestly, me speaking about disability is partially because I think for a very long time I've been scared that I would not be able to have a career in music with my disability. I think particularly in sort of the rock scene, but I know in the wider music industry in general, there is this sort of grind or hustle culture where you go on tour and you live it really rough, and you know, you barely sleep, and that sort of lifestyle is just not going to be possible for me with my chronic illness. And I was really worried that I was just not going to be able to do it. And I think at the moment the industry sort of expects you to kind of mold into what everyone else is doing. And so like speaking about being disabled has become a way to sort of, for me to sort of think, you know, it's to force the change that I need so that I'm actually going to be able to embark on this career in music. I'm very much forging my path as I'm speaking about it. So it's for that purpose. I think it's also to prove to myself that it can be done. I think talking about it and, you know, saying like I'm disabled and I'm fronting a rock band and I use my mobility aid on stage sometimes and I'm talking about it is sort of a way of being visible and a way of sort of saying, you know, it's happening, it's possible, I'm here, I'm doing it. And hopefully years to come in the future, my, you know, the ultimate like aim and dream would be for someone to see it and think that they could do it as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's certainly my, you know, my hope for your work. And I have seen on TikTok and in videos, people are responding to not only you but your music, and we are going to talk about your music and its impact in a little while. I do want to touch on something you said there. You know, you mentioned you went to therapy to kind of better understand where you were and your disability and kind of come to terms with that. You know, this isn't to put you on the spot in terms of your understanding of your chronic pain condition, but what have you learned about it and how you manage it and what it, you know, how it affects you and kind of what it is. I remember, for example, the reason why I ask is I did an interview recently and someone asked me about, you know, my cerebral palsy and how many weeks I was born premature and all this other stuff. And I was like, I had to actually do research and like be like, oh yeah, I remember that's why this is happening and this is why this is happening. So what do you understand about your chronic pain condition and how it affects you day to day, you know, in terms of, you know, your pain management and things like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's been a steep learning curve, but also something that's taken so many years to understand. I do think I've had it from a very young age. I was diagnosed in years ago. I can't remember even when. But I knew I'd had symptoms for a lot longer and hadn't been diagnosed, and experienced medical gaslighting and wasn't taken seriously and all of that, and then was sort of finally diagnosed and then got everything reinvestigated recently and then was sort of re-diagnosed. It was kind of reaffirmed that that was what was going on. And like I sort of said earlier, for a long time I was in denial. You know, we sort of talk about internalized ableism, where I was sort of thinking like, because it's an invisible disability, it's only visible because I use mobility aids, because it's an invisible condition. I was gaslighting myself into thinking, you know, there's nothing wrong with you. You should be able to do what everyone else is doing. Why can't you just, you know, live like everyone else is living? Why are you struggling so much? But then on the flip side of the same coin, I'd sort of be, you know, doubting how much I was struggling. And on a moment when I was having a better moment, I'd be pushing myself too hard and then feeling the repercussions afterwards with a big flare up of symptoms and things like that. So, you know, for ages and ages, and I still do it to an extent now, I was just completely in denial about the seriousness of the condition that I had. And then it kind of all came to a head when I say I've got everything reinvestigated. I think it was in 2021, when I had a particular symptom that flared up to such an extent that I couldn't work and I was signed off sick for a number of weeks. And then that was kind of the wake up call where I was like, oh God, you know, this is able to stop me living and stop me functioning. And I was bedbound for a number of weeks, didn't leave the house and stuff like that, and was at a really low point. And I think then I sort of realized that I needed to make some pretty radical changes in my life to be able to have a decent quality of life in a way that's possible for me. So learning about what pacing is and like really learning what pacing is. I thought I knew what pacing was, but I didn't. You know, I stripped everything back to basics and worked from there to figure out what was possible for me without experiencing a flare up. And you know, still to this day, I'm working with my therapist on things that I can do to make my life easier, in the sense of, like, I drive, for example, but I use a 2010 manual little car with a manual gearbox. And to able-bodied people, that might seem like, yeah, that's normal, but I think I hadn't even really acknowledged the level of pain and discomfort driving was giving me, just by using a manual gearbox, handling heavy doors, lifting the boot up and down myself, just little things like that. And you know, this can be applied to so many things in my life, but just as an example. My therapist has sort of been helping me to kind of come to the realization that I don't actually need to struggle through these things just because everyone else is doing it. It's okay to get an automatic car, for example. It's okay to, you know, spend on something that is going to make my life easier so that I can actually use my energy on the things that I really care about, which is music and, you know, being in my garden and things like that. So yeah, that's kind of been the main takeaway most recently, where I've sort of been thinking, like, I don't actually have to force myself to struggle through everything.
Yeah.
Other people don't have to struggle through ordinary things in life. And I think, like, it's been firstly realizing that I'm struggling when other people maybe aren't, and then sort of allowing myself the freedom and the care to say, you don't have to do.
Yeah. Yeah, and thank you so much for your honesty, you know, reflecting in that way, Jess, because it's lovely to hear about your, you know, again, you've again been through therapy and reflected, and obviously it's been a bit of a challenging time, you know, even changing from manual to automatic and stuff, you know, like it can be, my automatic car is a lifesaver, for example. So it's lovely to hear that you are, you know, you're making things easier for yourself, you know, apart from, I mean, going on tour and stuff, and we'll talk about that in a second. Just for my reference, do you have a name for your chronic pain condition, just as a resource for anybody that is coming to this and maybe has something similar? Is there a particular name that you would refer to your condition as?
Yeah, so, well, I have sort of to and fro on whether to disclose my diagnoses.
Okay. It's not something you have to. Yeah, it's not something you have to do. I'm just curious for reference. That's all.
No, absolutely. But I'm happy to sort of disclose that I have fibromyalgia among a series of other conditions. Yeah, I think, you know, I would want to be careful in terms of, like, talking about the intricacies of medical investigations and diagnoses and things like that, just because I've heard horror stories of people on the internet getting, you know, ripped to shreds by strangers who want to undermine them and stuff. So I'm a little bit cautious about that. But as you say, you know, it's like, even things like hearing that Lady Gaga had fibromyalgia, like, helped me. I was like, wow, that's, you know, obviously she's got a team of experts and is incredibly wealthy and, you know, all of that, but still, it was like, wow, she's doing that with fibromyalgia. So yeah, I acknowledge the sort of the use and the reason why it's important to talk about this specific condition that you've got, just so, as you say, people can kind of learn about it and raise awareness, and it can help anyone who might be having the same sort of situation.
Yeah. Well, again, so we'll reference the fibromyalgia and take it from there. But thank you so much for again that honesty there, because I know again it's not always easy to talk about this stuff and be open and honest about it. So hopefully people will be able to hear this, watch it, and see it as a resource. That is the aim of what we're doing here today. Certainly, again, this is more it's great for me because it's like a chat, and it's about me trying to better understand where you're at, and because I'm quite motivated and inspired by where you are as a musician and as a person as well. Certainly, I'm lucky enough to have been on tour and toured around Europe and Asia and done some pretty cool stuff and had certain questions leveled at me and things like that, as I know you have. So from my understanding, does your fibromyalgia and the other the cocktail, hopefully that's not a disrespectful term, the cocktail of the cocktail of differences, does it make it difficult to be in the band? And now I can assume that you're going to say no, because obviously I see that you play live regularly, and I can say, I can see that you are, regularly out there on the road. But again, that's my assumption. So can you tell me about what it is like being in Mallavora and having this cocktail of differences? Does it make it difficult? And tell me a bit more about
that. Honestly, I think if I was to sit here and tell you that my disability didn't make being in a band difficult, I don't think that would be particularly truthful. It does make it difficult. It absolutely does make it difficult. That's for a whole host of reasons, because the music industry isn't accessible. It's not accessible to audience members, let alone to musicians, where we're a small unsigned band. We're playing little underground venues with steps, with really sort of dodgy, dingy underground venues that are really difficult to actually access. There's no stages that have ramps. If I were to need a wheelchair on that particular day, I'm conscious that I've got the privilege of, full-time wheelchair users can't even access these venues, full stop. I am lucky enough to be able to struggle to walk down the steps, and I can get on the stages, but it's down to those minuscule details. But it's not just the inaccessibility of the venues in the industry, it's also the sort of toll that playing live does take on my body, and that's again sort of something that I've worried about, and thinking, we really want to go somewhere, we really feel like we're going somewhere, but am I actually going to be able to cope with that? And that's why I sort of want to reimagine my place and my space in the industry to make it sustainable for me. Because when I first started playing with the band, we'd play a live show, we'd play very high energy live shows, and I would come off stage and I would be close to passing out. I'd be very unwell, and the repercussions afterwards would last for days, and I'd be really ill. And I was worried about that, because at the time we were only playing one show here and there, and so I was sort of taking my time to recover afterwards. But firstly, I was aware that that's not healthy at all. It's not healthy to have to spend so much time recovering from one show. And B, it's not going to be practical if I want to go on tour and play multiple shows, in a week, potentially. How am I going to cope with that? And what's my quality of life going to be like when I'm not physically on stage? And, like 30 years ago, it might have been seen as rock and roll to be sort of killing yourself for the craft. But nowadays, like, you want to make a sustainable career out of it, right? I want to be doing this for years. And I think where I was when we first started was not conducive to me being able to do this long term. I have slowly started to work out ways of making things easier for me. So most recently, we went on our first mini tour of 3 nights in a row. We'd never done 3 nights in a row before. And thankfully now I have figured out, and I'm still figuring out more, but I've figured out a number of coping mechanisms and ways to manage it. whether that's, you know, making sure my night's sleep is decent, is sort of making sure I'm well fed and making sure I'm not the driver and someone else is doing the driving, you know, heat packs and things like that on sort of sore areas of my body, and having a whole host of painkillers, and you know, there's a number of different things that now I sort of know I need, but as I say, I'm still figuring it out. But no, I can't just rock up like the three other boys in my band and play a show and then continue as normal afterwards. There's a lot of thought and preparation that goes into it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that you kind of answered my next question, you know, pretty well there. But I do want to, if you could get, have you got a practical example then, you know, maybe on the recent tour, you know, of what you've learned again from that very beginning when you started out, you know, and you were kind of pushing yourself to the limit. You know, what is something you do differently now? Obviously, you mentioned you're packing heat packs, for example, but you know, I love there's a little bit. I know there's a video on your TikTok about the, you know, you pack your gig bag and things like that, which is lovely. But practically, what is something that you do now that you do religiously, you know, that really helps you to manage your pain, things like that you just weren't doing when you first started out?
Great question. The first thing that springs to mind, it's going to sound so silly, but it is sitting down at every available opportunity. And I wasn't doing that before, and I'm still bad at doing it. You know, the boys have to say to me, sit down, just rest. You don't have to be stood up, engaging, you know, on form 24/7. You need to be sitting and resting at every available point. And yeah, like I say, I really wasn't doing that before. I was just trying to soak it all in. I was trying to, you know, be up helping lifting the gear into the venue, which is just ridiculous. Just you know, but again, it's that internalized ableism of sort of thinking I should be able to do this, everyone else is doing this, but also just wanting to be part of it like everyone else is. And it does feel sad that I feel like I potentially have to miss out on little bits of networking or chatting or whatever that I'd really love to be doing, but I need to go sit down and rest. But you know, again, that's something that I want to sort of change moving forward to make things more accessible for people like us, so that you know, the networking and all the exciting things that happen aren't done in a way that is inaccessible to us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you, again, you know, you've built such a, this is a dirty word, and I'm going to use it because for the spirit of conversation, you build a bit of a brand around yourself, and that is going to be my next question, how you feel about that. But certainly, you know, seeing your progress, you know, kind of, you know, because I'm reminded of, you know, having to crawl on stages and climb on stages, climb over wires and trip over wires and stuff to get, you know, lugging around drum kits and stuff. So I do have quite a lot of empathy, different experiences, of course, but quite a lot of empathy for where you're at. Because I wish I'd sat down more. Such a, yeah, well, I don't like using the word silly because, of course, it's not silly. It's your experience.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're like, oh yeah, I wish I should have sat down more. But of course, you're trying to make the most of the experience, aren't you, and stuff like that. But it really does take it out of you. So certainly can empathize with you on that. In terms of my next question, which is kind of the last one before we'll talk about some of the new music you're bringing out and the songs you put out and stuff like that. How do you feel about the word brand? Because you've created a brand that is meant, certainly it is motivating people. You know, it's motivating people with neurodivergence. It's motivating people with disabilities. You know, people are commenting on how kick-ass your hair looks. People are commenting on how, you know, you've got a really cool vibe and a cool image. Now, does that register with you? Is that something that matters to you, but also I guess the band as well, because you are, you know, you've become quite a public face you know, particularly around, you know, creating not only a promotion for your band, but also, you know, supporting and inspiring those with neurodivergence disabilities. So how do you feel about yourself as a brand? And is that a dirty word? I don't know how that feels for you.
Yeah, it's really funny to hear you say that, to be honest, because I don't think I have the first clue how to build a brand. I'm constantly hearing you need to build a brand, you need to, you know, figure out how to market yourself, you need to figure out what your niche is, how do you make this clear brand that is visible. And we have conversations about that in the band all the time, because that is what the key is now, building an effective and clear brand. It's obviously great to hear you say I seem to have done that successfully. It certainly wasn't consciously. I don't, to be honest, I don't really know what my brand is. If you were to ask me, like, what is your brand? I don't know. Like, being disabled, being in a rock band, is that a brand? I genuinely don't have the first clue about what building a brand is about. But hopefully, as you say, I've done it and it will help me, because it's supposed to be helpful.
Yeah. It's certainly not for me to say what your brand is, but I think maybe I'll rephrase the question, because I think, like I say, it is, that was a really cool answer around the word brand, but perhaps image is another thing.
Right.
Do you think of the band, of your image? Because do you think of your image and what it means to people? Do you think about, again, I've seen a bunch of, sort of transformation TikToks that you've done where you kind of are open and honest about maybe feeling rough, feeling, you're having a flare up, and then all of a sudden you look like a badass rock star, and certainly you look very cool. But so does that, do you think about that? Is that something that you think about, your image, and I guess as a wider context, the band's image as well?
Yeah, I see what you're saying about image. I definitely think about it. I sort of, again, it kind of goes back to what I was saying about, like, sort of making a statement without necessarily sort of wanting to make a statement just because you started talking about being disabled, or using a little catchy phrase in a TikTok suddenly becomes like a catchphrase and a thing that you're known by. And yeah, I am very sort of, I do think a lot about my image. I struggle with identity issues in a number of regards. Like, I've struggled with my disabled identity. I've struggled with my racial identity. I've struggled with, gender identity. I have a number of sort of personal sort of struggles around identity. That's usually what I write about, and what our music is about. So I definitely struggle to present myself in a way that feels like authentic, and I struggle with the sort of notion of being perceived and not knowing how I'm being perceived and what people are thinking when they're looking at me and a video of me or a photo of me. I am also aware of the fact that I don't want to be the disabled artist. You know what I mean? I don't want to be the disabled rock star. Like, it's like, I don't know, it sounds cool, but I want people to enjoy the music. It's first and foremost for us, it's about the music, and it's about you enjoying the music. As I've said, I'm talking about disability to prove to myself that it can be done, that I can do this and it's going to work. And, you can be disabled and be in a rock band. And that's as much for myself as anyone else's benefit. But yeah, as I say, also to prove to other people that it is possible. I'm aware that representation isn't everything, but I think if I had seen someone within the heavy music scene being visibly disabled, or not even visibly disabled, but talking about disability or neurodivergence or whatever it was, I'm not saying that's not out there, it definitely is. I just personally hadn't seen it. I think if I had seen it, it would have helped. So it's just sort of trying to illuminate those issues, and I guess sort of that's becoming part of my image. I'm conscious of my hair and what that means for my identity. People have a hell of a lot of questions when it comes to my hair and where it comes from, and what am I? And that's another whole sort of conversation we could talk about for hours, to be honest, about how I felt about my hair and how to wear my hair natural and what that means. And so I think, to be honest, I'm just trying to be as authentic and push myself to be as confident outwardly as I physically can, as I physically possibly can, to try and present this image of someone who is proud to be disabled, proud to have big curly hair, proud to be mixed heritage, proud to be femme presenting, and whether that's true on the inside or not is yet to be sort of decided, but that's the hope, I think.
Yeah, and again, thank you again for sharing, because again, it's I'm learning more about you, and obviously we are going to talk about the music now, but certainly for other people watching this who are going through some of the same things, the reason why I asked is, again, the TikToks you appear very confident, and you certainly are, certainly on stage, the way you present yourself, but obviously it's important for people to realize that you're not always that way, and there's a lot going on behind there. So that's why I asked that question, and I really appreciate that honesty there as well. I think I do kind of want to again talk about the music, and obviously you're all over your TikToks. Is obviously you've got a new single out, a recent single, which is Imposter. Now you have publicly talked about this a lot and what it means to you. You mentioned about kind of rebelling against that sort of imposter syndrome that you might have with family or the music industry and all that sort of stuff. But now that it's been out in the public consciousness, and now it has thousands of streams and obviously viral on TikTok, what is your relationship like with that song? And again, because again, it goes from you and what it means to you, and it means something completely different to someone across the other side of the world, or it means something to them. They take it forward and they use it for motivation, which I've seen people do. So how do you feel about Imposter now that it's been out in the world, and it's out, not only it's out of your brain, into the world, and it's making a difference in people's lives?
Yeah, I think I have sort of become more aware of how music in general, but especially that song, I've found people can sort of take their own meaning from it and sort of hear what they need to hear in that moment. And I think that's something quite special about it. But when I was writing it, I was in a really lonely place. I wrote it in 2020, sort of in the midst of the Black Lives Matter movement, where, as someone who's light-skinned and mixed heritage, not with a Black background, I was feeling, as a lot of people were, very sort of angry and disenchanted really with the people in my life, the white people in my life who I felt hadn't done enough to protect me, or who I felt weren't sort of doing their bit to dismantle racial injustice and systemic racism. And so it started from a place of anger sort of at whiteness, really. But it then turned into something much more about me and my sort of discomfort and feeling displaced about my own racial identity, feeling very, very sort of unsettled and aware of the fact that I was so light-skinned and so not very far from whiteness at all. And it kind of all goes back to this conversation about being perceived, and the fact that every person that I meet perceives me differently. I tell you, everyone has a different idea of what they think I am, where they think I come from, what my sort of race or ethnicity is. And I was really sort of confronting that and trying to deal with that, and sort of trying to sit there and sort of think, well, actually, I've got a huge amount of privilege in this too. My proximity to whiteness, as it were, is something that gives me a hell of a lot of privilege. So I can sit there and be angry at white people for feeling like they're not doing enough, but it sort of then became about me feeling like, oh God, maybe I'm not doing enough. I don't think I'm doing enough. And feeling like, yeah, just feeling really out of place. And it was a really, really dark, lonely time, to be honest. So the song it tackles both of those things. So, part of it, you can probably read the whole song as feeling like I'm directing it at someone else, but you could probably also read the song as directing it at myself as well.
Okay. Yeah. I remember you saying online that there was a little bit of that, and that imposter syndrome that I think certainly I've been through, and hopefully it's going to motivate and will continue to motivate other people. I wanted to kind of ask a similar question that I did earlier, because you mentioned obviously physically you've kind of adapted how you've sort of changed, and in terms of what you do on tour, for example, to manage your pain. But I also, you mentioned there, obviously you've written a lot of songs over the last few years. Ego came out in 2020, for example. And I kind of wanted to ask you, how would you say you've changed and developed as an artist And as a musician, since that time, you know, over the last 2 years, a lot has happened in the world and for your band. So how would you say, as an artist and a musician, you've changed over the last few years since that track came out, and since, I guess, you burst onto the scene of heavy rock music and Brit rock music?
So, interesting thing about that debut EP, I didn't write any of the lyrics on that. I had just joined the band, and prior to me being the lead singer, our bassist was doing the vocals, and they were a three-piece for a period of time, and he had written all of those songs. So when I joined the band, I sort of adapted it slightly, but none of the lyrics, all of the lyrics are his and what he wrote. So I can't speak on what those mean really, but it was certainly about sort of personal things that he was going through at the time. But as I say, when I joined the band, my sort of input at that point was, you know, how can I adapt the sound to make it more like me? How am I going to fit into this sound? I sort of started incorporating vocal harmonies and kind of slightly adapting melodies and things like that to suit my voice. And so since that 4-track EP, I've been writing all of the vocals, the lyrics for our music. And so in some ways, I feel like I'm only just getting started. Obviously, we've released Imposter. We have just recorded a second single that is actually about my disabled experience. So I'm excited for that one to come out. But at the moment, I'm focusing a lot on writing about identity and the different aspects of my identity. I think that's definitely going to sort of form the theme for what we hope is going to be a second EP. Also, I have sort of been learning to scream, which I think when I joined the band, if someone had told me that I was going to be screaming, I would have laughed at them. I really didn't have myself put down as someone who was going to sort of play around with like vocal distortion and rasp and screaming and stuff. But I think it was probably Lizzie Hale's scream in Hailstorm that I suddenly thought for the first time, oh, I want to be able to do that. And like Nothing More as well, I've listened to a lot, and Johnny's scream as well, is I just loved it. And I connected a lot more with that than like the sort of deep guttural screaming that you hear a lot in metal. So I started trying to teach myself to do it. So you hear the first bit of screaming that I've ever really done in Imposter. I'm very much a beginner, so I'm still quite nervous about performing it live because I don't feel like it's particularly strong yet, but we do have some very cool screams coming up in some next singles.
Yeah, I'm super excited to talk about that, and I'll give you a chance to do the plugging bit at the end. And about 4 or 5 questions left now. I'm going to squeeze one in that I hadn't thought about before. You know, you mentioned obviously being in therapy, you know, and that is, you know, for yourself. I wonder, you know, you mentioned just writing, for example, writing a track about your experience as a disabled person. Do you find, has writing about it, has, you know, recording it, given you any catharsis, you know, a form of musical therapy, if you will, putting it out there into the world on record, and kind of talking about it so openly? Has that helped you, has it helped you in any way?
Yeah, definitely. I write a lot of sort of stream of consciousnesses. So I do a lot of just on the notes on my phone. I just write whatever's coming to my head about a certain thing. And that's usually not particularly coherent, but I tend to use kind of those blocks of writing and turn those into lyrics, and then form sort of the vocal melodies at a later stage. But I have felt that the more I write it down, the more I sort of speak about it, and singing as well, it helps it get it out there. I suppose it's not just circling around in my head. I do find it incredibly cathartic. Because like obviously therapy can be cathartic, but music for me is really the way that it just like comes out of my body, feels less scary, because you know, I've put it somewhere, and it's you know, it's more tangible, and it
Yeah.
feels like it has maybe less power over me once it's out of my head.
Interesting. Yeah. And once the songs are out there, you can kind of breathe a little bit, you know, breathe a sort of sigh. And again, having less power over you. That's a really interesting reflection. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it.
Kind of putting it out into the world. So it's not holding you down. Yeah. I did want to talk about your vocal, because there was I think your vocal is fantastic. I think it's very powerful. I really
Thank
like the
you.
scream in Imposter.
Thank you.
It usually bookends most of the TikToks, and it's like, and I'm like, it's a really cool dynamic, and it brings a lot to the song, having that scream element there. But more than that, again, that powerful vocal. So I wanted to ask you if you could take me back to the time in your life, if you can remember it. Where did you find your voice, Jess?
What a great question. And I do have a memory that immediately comes to mind. On my dad's side of my family, a lot of them are singers. So there's singing in my dad's family. My dad's got a lovely voice. His brother has a career in music. His mother was an opera singer. So there's music on that side of the family. And I was learning piano as a kid. There's a piano behind me. But the singing came when I was at brownie camp. I was a little brownie, and we were on it. I'm pretty sure it was my first ever brownie camp. I must have been, I don't know, I must have been 8 or 9 years old, maybe 8 years old. And we were sort of sat in a circle, as you do in brownies. And I think we went round with a little kazoo, and they were getting us to go around and like blow a little tune in a kazoo one at a time. And everyone had to guess what the tune was. And I like played in the kazoo the very opening of Bohemian Rhapsody, like, is this the real life, from that bit. And I finished that, and everyone knew what it was. And then the brownie leader just sort of said to me, she was like, take the kazoo out of your mouth and sing it. And I just like did as she said, and I sung it on the spot, and got a huge like clap from everyone around me. And the leaders were just saying, what a beautiful voice, you need to sing, and all of this stuff. And that was when I was like, oh my god. And that was literally the first time, and I've not thought about that in many years, so thank you for bringing that lovely memory back.
There you go. Well, again, amazing. Like, again, it can happen as early as that. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that memory as well. Again, hopefully it'll relate to some people. We're going to do a couple of deep questions now. This is what I would do for musicians on Soundsphere typically, and then we'll do the plugging bit at the end. We've talked a lot about, again, the streams. We've talked a lot about being able to go on tour and things like that. But how do you define, Jess, how do you define success as a musician and as a person? And are they one and the same thing, or are they two different things?
Oh, what a question. First, I'm just going to go off the first thing that springs to mind, and I would say that they feel like separate things for me at the moment. In music, I have sort of quite clear idea of what success feels like to me. We've always said as a band that we would feel successful if we had 1,000 dedicated fans, like fans who really cared, who wanted to come to our shows, who wanted to buy our merch. Like that, for us, we would feel like we had, you know, really made it. Because 1,000, it doesn't sound like a lot to say, oh, 1,000 fans, but 1,000 dedicated fans is really a lot, and that I think takes a lot of time to foster that. So hitting that would feel like success for us musically. Personally, I think success for me would feel like breaking free of expectation that's put onto me, and truly breaking free of expectation, healing intergenerational trauma and breaking the cycle of trauma, and feeling free to live as authentically and happily and openly, and, you know, without care for what other people think, as physically possible. That's I think that's what success feels like for me.
That's possibly the most concise answer I've ever had to that question. So
Really?
yeah,
I felt like a mess.
yeah, you nailed it. That was really, and again, very relatable to a lot of people. This one perhaps is even deeper, because again,
Okay.
there's strands to this. Okay, because again, you're not just talking as a musician. You obviously have your platform, and you know, again, you're talking about neurodivergence. So, what kind of legacy do you want to leave as an artist? What would you like your legacy to be?
Oh my God, that's a huge question. I have touched on it, but I think like the dream for me, the dream would be like when I'm long gone, that people who have a disability in any form, whether that's visible or invisible, could see what I was doing and what I was speaking about and feel seen and feels like it's possible for them and that they can do it and they can enter the music industry. But I also have a bit of a sort of niggling motivation to want to change the music industry for good. And change it so that there aren't barriers for disabled people to enter the music industry. So, you know, once I'm gone, I hope that I have made some sort of significant change with the help of many others. I'm sure many other amazing people to stop barriers for disabled people, to make music and live shows accessible for musicians and audiences, and to just sort of make the issue of disability a more visible one, and get people talking about it.
Yeah, it's lovely to hear you speak on this stuff, Jess, because your values very much align with my own, and obviously bigger companies and platforms like Attitude is Everything are doing some great work as well, and I think it'd be great to sort of, you know, see a lot of people come together in the next few years to again, you know, promote disability awareness in the industry. There are some amazing people out there already, and I count you as one of those people who are making real dents in the community. Now, before we do the plug-in thing to finish, and I've grilled you for nearly an hour. So tell me a bit more about yourself. What do you love? What do you do outside of music? Movies, people, places. What do you get inspired by? What motivates you outside of music? Talk to me about your passions and your loves.
Oh, I love that question. I think prior to COVID, I really loved going to new places. I was lucky enough to go to New Zealand with my partner prior to COVID, and just felt like freer than I'd ever felt in my whole life. It was absolutely magical, and I've been lucky enough to travel to a number of countries in Europe, and I absolutely loved that. As my health has sort of declined, and because of COVID and things like that, traveling isn't really at the top of my list at the moment. But I am lucky enough to have my own garden now, and that is something that has been bringing me so much joy. I can't tell you, especially like access to open air and access to nature. Before I was living in this place, I was living in a flat. It was a beautiful flat, but it was entirely indoors and didn't have a garden, and actually wasn't very easy to get outside at all from that building. And I spent a lot of time indoors, and I think it really didn't do me a whole lot of good. So being able to be out in my garden and learning and failing to grow things, I've been really enjoying.
Love it.
And yeah, just like figuring it out is still completely new to me, but I'm finding so much joy in my garden. In terms of like TV and food, I enjoy watching thrillers. I am always into thrillers and things that are intense, not very good for the nervous system. I don't think all that adrenaline, but I just can't help myself. I love those intense like action thrillers. And did you ask about food, or did I imagine that?
I didn't, but now I want to know. So tell me about your love of food. Let's go.
I was like, come on, Dom, you did say food, right? You said food, because I want to tell you about food.
Go on, tell me about the food. Let's go.
So I come from a Jewish background, and a mixture of Eastern European and Middle Eastern heritage. and the food that I grew up with was absolutely incredible. So just anything from the Middle Eastern region, really: hummus, falafel, shawarma, shakshuka, all sorts of like Middle Eastern and Jewish cooking is my fave.
Wow, it's making me hungry. It's time.
Yeah.
It's time for tea. I'm aware I've kept you for a very long time. So this is the question which tests whether I've done my job properly, Jess. So, is there anything that I've missed? Anything you'd like to plug? Anything you want to promote before we finish?
The one thing that I would like to tell people about, you have very kindly mentioned our new single Imposter, but we have just released the music video for Imposter. We built the set entirely ourselves. Our bassist was the creative producer for that video, so it's something we're super proud of, and it's the first sort of piece of content, like first sort of, you know, video ever, first ever music video that I've ever used my walking stick in, so that's quite a big moment for me. So the Imposter music video is out now, and you can go find the full video on YouTube.
Fantastic. We'll make sure that link is in the description to our video, and anywhere else we put it as well. Make sure all your links to social media are there too for people. Jess, thank you so much for your time tonight. Really appreciate it. I'm so excited for your future, for the band's future as well. Give my best to everybody, and yeah, thank you so much for making the time for me.
Thank you so much, Dom. I have absolutely loved chatting to you.